The autopsy reports for the men who previously crossed Chairman Minjun all shared one biological impossibility. Their blood had frozen solid inside their veins before their hearts even stopped beating. In the soul underworld, this anomaly was not discussed. It was simply accepted as a law of nature. You do not look him in the eye. You do not speak unless spoken to. And under no circumstances, not for a handshake, not for a plea of mercy, do you ever let your skin touch his. Minjun was not merely a crime lord. He was a walking void, a temperature anomaly wrapped in a three-piece suit. For 600 years, isolation was his armor. The banquet at the Grand Hyatt was a summit of wolves. Politicians, traffickers, industry titans. But the most dangerous creature in the room sat motionless at the head of the table. Nia was invisible to them. She was part of the furniture, a foreign maid moving through the shadows, carrying a tray of vintage Cabernet. She was exhausted, overworked, and for one fatal second unbalanced. The crystal didn't just break, it detonated. Red wine splattered across the chairman's pristine white cuff. The reaction was immediate. It was absolute. The conversation didn't taper off, it was severed. Every guard in the room shifted their weight, hands moving to the holsters inside their jackets. They weren't preparing for a fight. They were preparing to witness an execution. In this room, spilling wine on Minjun was not an accident. It was a suicide note. Nia did not know the history. She did not know that she was standing next to a man whose touch meant death. She only knew she had made a mistake, and she had to fix it. She reached out. The guards flinched. The guests looked away. They expected the frost. They expected her hand to turn black and necrotic the moment it made contact with his wrist. She pressed the cloth against his skin. Steam erupted from the point of contact. White, pressurized vapor hissed into the air, curling around their fingers. The wine on his sleeve boiled away in an instant. Minjun didn't strike her. He didn't move. For the first time in centuries, the predator froze. His eyes widened, staring at her hand on his arm with a look that wasn't rage. It was confusion. It was shock. The room waited for him to kill her. But Minjun wasn't thinking about murder. He was paralyzed by a sensation he had forgotten existed. He was burning. Before we continuing this thrilling story, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. Where are you watching from? Like, comment, and share. To understand the gravity of that moment, one must understand the physics of Minjun's existence. For 6 centuries, he has functioned less like a man and more like a localized weather event. The core temperature of his body rests at absolute zero. Matter stops moving when it encounters him. A handshake doesn't just chill the skin, it crystallizes the water in the cells, shattering capillaries instantly. He possesses the wealth of nations, yet he is the poorest man on earth. He cannot feel the texture of silk, the heat of a coffee cup, or the warmth of another human body. His life is a pristine, frozen hell. Until the maid. The security footage from the banquet hall shows Nia being escorted out, not by the police, but by Minjun's personal guard. She was not taken to a holding cell or a shallow grave in the forest. She was placed in a black sedan and driven to the spire of the Lot World Tower, the penthouse. To Nia, this was not a reprieve. It was an escalation. In the criminal underworld, you don't bring a witness to your home unless you intend to make sure they never leave it. The penthouse was not built for comfort. It was a cryochamber. The thermostat was set to temperatures that would be illegal in a prison. Nia stood in the center of the vast, marble living room, shivering uncontrollably. She was waiting for the bullet. She was waiting for the punishment for ruining a $10,000 suit. But Minjun did not hold a gun. He held a towel. He stood 10 feet away from her, watching her with the intensity of a scientist observing a volatile chemical reaction. He had removed the jacket. He had rolled up his sleeves. He needed to verify the data. He needed to know if the steam at the banquet was a hallucination or a miracle. He closed the distance. Nia flinched, backing into a glass table. Her breath misted in the freezing air. "Touch me," he said. It was not a request. It was a test. Nia refused. Her survival instinct screamed that this was a trap, that he wanted her to touch him so he could justify killing her in self-defense. She shook her head, pleading, clutching her hands to her chest. Minjun stopped. He realized that fear was a barrier he could not cross with force. He needed her consent. He needed her will. He pulled a tablet from his pocket. With 2 taps, he pulled up a file. It wasn't a hit list. It was a bank ledger. "Your father's gambling debt," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. $200,000. The interest alone will enslave your family for 3 generations. He turned the screen toward her. "Touch my hand again, just once, and I wipe the ledger clean." The offer hung in the freezing air. It was a transaction. A life of debt erased for a single second of contact. Nia looked at the screen, then at him. She saw a monster who could buy and sell her bloodline. But Minjun, in the privacy of his own mind, saw something else. He looked at his own hand, the hand that had toppled governments and crushed rivals, and realized it was trembling. "I have conquered cities," he thought. "I have outlived dynasties. I have watched empires rise and turn to dust. Why do my hands shake before a girl who owns nothing?" He was terrified. He was terrified that it wouldn't happen again. He was terrified that the warmth he felt at the banquet was a fluke, and that this time he would feel nothing but the familiar, crushing cold. Nia stepped forward. She didn't do it for him. She did it for the ledger. She reached out. Her fingers were trembling, warm and alive. She placed her palm flat against his chest, directly over his heart. The reaction was not gentle. It was violent. It wasn't just steam this time. It was a thermal explosion. The collision of her chaotic, mortal heat with his ancient, absolute cold created a shockwave. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse blew out, raining shards of glass down onto the streets of Seoul below. The air pressure in the room reversed instantly. Minjun was thrown back as if hit by a freight train. He crashed into the far wall, gasping, clutching his chest. But he wasn't in pain. As he lay on the marble floor, surrounded by broken glass and freezing wind, he looked up at her. He was breathless. His skin was flushed pink, a color he hadn't worn since the Joseon dynasty. His heart, a dormant stone for centuries, was hammering against his ribs. Nia stood amidst the wreckage, untouched by the blast. She looked at her hands, then at the most powerful man in Korea cowering on the floor. The dynamic had shifted. The hierarchy was broken. Minjun tried to stand, but his legs failed him. He was weak. He was vulnerable. And in that silence, Nia realized the truth. She wasn't the prisoner in this tower. She wasn't the victim. She was the battery, and he was starving. The promotion was not recorded in human resources. There was no contract signed. Nia's uniform changed from the rough gray cotton of the housekeeping staff to tailored silk, costing more than her father's entire lifetime earnings. She was moved from the servants' quarters in the basement to the east wing of the penthouse, a sector of the building that even the highest-ranking lieutenants were forbidden to enter. To the outside world, she had become the chairman's favorite. In the break rooms and security stations, the whispers were venomous. They called her an opportunist. They called her the chairman's whore. They believed she had seduced a monster for a payout. They were wrong. She wasn't a mistress. She was a medical subject. For the next 10 days, there was no romance. There was only data collection. Minjun did not court her. He studied her. Their interactions were reduced to a series of clinical, terrifying experiments. He would sit across from her at the long mahogany table, a stopwatch in one hand, a thermometer in the other. "Index finger," he would command. She would extend her hand. He would press his thumb against her fingerprint for exactly 10 seconds. Then he would pull away, recording his body temperature, measuring the rate at which the frost receded from his skin. He treated her touch not as a gesture of affection, but as a dosage of medication. Too little, and he remained cold. Too much, and the house might blow up again. Nia lived in a paradox. She slept in a bed made of Egyptian cotton, ate meals prepared by Michelin-star chefs, and wore diamonds to dinner. Yet she shook with terror every time he entered the room. The luxury was a facade. She was a lab rat in a gilded cage. She did not understand what she was, But the archives in Minjun's library held the answer. He was a dakibai, an immortal guardian cursed with abundance and isolation. To break the cycle, lore dictated he needed a sunchild, a rare biological anomaly capable of generating spiritual heat. But the texts contained a grim footnote. The heat of a sunchild is finite. When a dakibai draws from it, the human host usually incinerates. They burn out like a fuse overloaded by a power grid. Nia was different. She wasn't burning out, she was recharging. On the 11th day, Minjun left the penthouse for a meeting with the syndicate elders. He left the heavy oak door to his private gallery unlocked. Nia wandered in. She expected to find stolen art, weapons, or stacks of illicit cash. Instead, she found a mausoleum. The room was lined with portraits, dozens of them. Oil paintings from the 1700s, daguerreotypes from the 1800s, Polaroids from the 1980s. They were all women, different races, different eras, different styles of dress, but they all shared one thing. They all looked vaguely like Nia. They had the same eyes, the same defiant posture. And in the corner of every frame, there was a date of death. Each date was only weeks after the date of their meeting. "Do you like the collection?" Minjun's voice came from the doorway. He hadn't left. He was watching her. Nia spun around. The terror that had been simmering for days finally boiled over. She pointed at the wall of dead women, the graveyard of his past experiments. "Am I the next one?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Am I just another battery you're going to drain until I die? Am I the first one you've tried to save?" Minjun walked into the room. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. He looked at the painting of a girl from 1920, then he looked at Nia. His expression was unreadable, ancient, and devastatingly sad. "No," he said softly, "you are not the first I have tried to save." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the chill radiating off him. "You are just the first who didn't turn to ash when I touched her." In the ecology of the supernatural underworld, weakness is not a quiet decline. It is a signal flare. The Council of Shadows, a coalition of ancient entities that controlled the dark markets of Asia, had been monitoring Minjun's biometric data. They did not care about the rumors of a maid. They cared about the temperature readings. For centuries, the air around the chairman registered at 10 degrees below zero. In the last week, it had risen to a tepid 60 degrees. To the human world, this was weather. To the council, it was blood in the water. The dakibai was thawing, and if he was thawing, he could be killed. The solstice gala was the perfect stage for a public execution. Minjun attended not out of desire, but out of necessity, to project strength. He brought Nia with him, draped in emerald silk, a shield of wealth to hide her status as a prisoner. But the assassin did not come from the shadows. He walked through the front door, wearing the face of a waiter. It happened in the blink of an eye. A blade, forged from obsidian and dipped in hydra venom, lunged toward Minjun's ribs. By all laws of physics established over Minjun's 600-year life, the blade should have shattered against his skin. His flesh was supposed to be diamond-hard ice. But the blade didn't shatter. It sank in. Minjun stumbled back, clutching his side. Dark, thick blood, mortal blood, seeped through his fingers. The room erupted into chaos. The impossibility of the moment paralyzed his own guards. The chairman was bleeding. The immortal was dying. This was the cost of his proximity to Nia. She wasn't just warming him, she was humanizing him. And mortality has no defense against a knife. In the mayhem, the crowd stampeded toward the exits. The security detail was overwhelmed. Nia was knocked to the floor, unhurt, unnoticed. She looked at the exit. The double doors were wide open. The night air was right there. No guards blocked her path. Minjun was on his knees, gasping for air, his vision fading. This was the moment. The golden cage was unlocked. She looked at the freedom she had prayed for every night. Then she looked at the man bleeding on the carpet. He is a monster. He is the reason I am a prisoner. He kidnapped me. If I run now, I disappear. If I run now, I am free. But if I run now, he dies. Logic dictated she run. Instinct commanded she stay. As the assassin raised the obsidian blade for the killing strike, Nia did not flee. She lunged. She threw her body between the killer and the chairman, expanding her arms, not to fight, but to shield. The assassin's hand connected with Nia's shoulder to shove her aside. It was a fatal error. The latent heat of a sunchild, usually suppressed, flared in defense. It wasn't warmth. It was concentrated solar radiation. The assassin didn't just burn. His hand began to disintegrate. He screamed, a sound that cut through the panic of the hall, and scrambled backward, clutching a charred stump where his fingers used to be. Minjun looked up, his vision blurring, seeing only the silhouette of a girl glowing with terrifying, beautiful light. She wasn't just his battery anymore. She was his weapon. The assassin fled, vanishing into the fleeing crowd. He had failed to kill the king, but he had succeeded in something far more dangerous. He had seen the face of the shield. The council now knew the secret. Minjun wasn't just weak, he was tethered. And the source of his vulnerability was a girl named Nia. The war had shifted targets. The penthouse was compromised. The fortress was breached. For the first time in memory, Minjun was not running the board, he was running for his life. They retreated to a safe house in the mountains of Gangwon-do, a concrete brutalist structure buried deep in the forest, invisible to satellite imaging. Here, the hierarchy of power didn't just shift, it inverted. Minjun, the immortal Dakibai, was feverish. The wound from the obsidian blade was refusing to close. His immortality, once a roaring fire, was now a flickering candle. He could not lift a glass of water without his hand trembling. Nia was no longer the maid. She was the medic. She was the guard. She changed his bandages. She checked the perimeter. The girl who had been terrified to look him in the eye was now the only thing standing between him and the grave. It was in this forced isolation that the silence between them changed. It was no longer the silence of predator and prey. It was the silence of two people trapped in a lifeboat. On the third night, the fever broke. Minjun sat by the fire, watching the flames. Nia sat across from him, exhausted, her eyes dark with fatigue. He began to speak, not commands, not threats, confessions. He told her about the Joseon era. He told her about the wife he buried in 1604 and the daughter he lost to a plague in 1750. He explained the true cruelty of his curse. It wasn't the cold, it was the continuity. To be immortal, he said, his voice rough with disuse, is to watch the world turn into a graveyard. Everyone I have ever loved is dust. I am a museum of grief. Nia listened. She didn't see a monster anymore. She saw a man who had been drowning for 6 centuries. He reached out. This time there was no transaction, no debt to be cleared, no experiment to be recorded. He placed his hand on her cheek. For him, it was a revelation. He didn't just feel the heat of the sunchild. He felt the texture of her skin, the pulse in her jaw, the softness of her hair. It was the first time he had touched a human being with the intent to comfort, rather than to possess. For Nia, the fear was gone. In its place was a dangerous, heavy gravity. She leaned into his touch. The room didn't explode. The windows didn't shatter. The air just settled. But in the physics of magic, energy is never created. It is only transferred. Minjun was blind to the cost. He was drunk on the sensation of being alive. He didn't notice that as the color returned to his face, it was draining from hers. He didn't notice that her breath was becoming shallow. He wanted to love her, but he didn't understand that his love was parasitic. They fell asleep on the rug before the fire, his hand still resting in hers. It was the most peaceful night of his life. It was the morning light that revealed the truth. Minjun woke first. He felt strong. The pain in his side was gone. He looked down at Nia, still sleeping, intending to wake her gently. Then he froze. Lying across her forehead, stark against her dark curls, was a single, thick streak of pure white hair. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was necrosis. It was age. He looked at her skin. It was translucent, gray. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a single night. The realization hit him with the force of the obsidian blade. The warmth he felt wasn't magic. It was her life force. He wasn't becoming human. He was feeding. He was siphoning her years, her vitality, her very soul to patch the holes in his own existence. He pulled his hand away, as if he had been burned. Nia stirred, opening her eyes. She smiled weakly, reaching for him. Minjun. He scrambled backward, pressing his back against the cold concrete wall, horror written across his face. He looked at his hands, hands that looked healthy, strong, and murderous. I thought, he whispered, his voice breaking, I thought you were my salvation. He looked at the white streak in her hair, the physical receipt of his selfishness. I didn't realize I was your executioner. Cruelty is often mistaken for malice. But for a man like Minjun, cruelty was a surgical tool. It was the only instrument precise enough to sever the bond before it killed her. He knew that if he asked Nia to leave, she would refuse. She would argue. She would stay and let him drain the life out of her until she was a withered husk in that mountain cabin. To save her, he had to break her. He waited for her to dress. He waited for the hope to return to her eyes, and then he extinguished it. You can leave, he said. He did not look at her. He looked at the fire, his face composed into the mask of the chairman, cold, bored, indifferent. Nia didn't understand. She asked if they were moving locations. No, he corrected, his voice devoid of the warmth that had been there only hours before. I mean, you can leave. The experiment is concluded. My wound is healed. You have served your purpose. He turned to her, and for the first time since the banquet, his eyes were dead. He threw a stack of cash onto the table. Not payment, dismissal. You were a useful battery, Nia, but I don't keep empty vessels. It was a lie forged in love, but it landed like a slap. Nia stood frozen. The intimacy of the previous night, the confession, the touch, he was rewriting it all as a transaction. She wasn't the woman who saved him. She was just equipment. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She looked at the money, then at him, and walked out the door. She chose dignity over the truth. Minjun watched her go. He waited until the heavy steel door clicked shut. He waited until he heard her footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. Then the chairman crumbled. He sank to the floor, gripping his chest, gasping as if the air had been sucked out of the room. He had just cut off his own lifeline to ensure she kept hers. But he had made a critical miscalculation. He assumed the danger was him. He assumed that if he removed himself from the equation, she would be safe. He forgot that in the wild, you do not leave a wounded prey animal unattended. The Council of Shadows had not lost the trail. They were simply patient. They watched the cabin from the ridgeline. They saw the girl leave. They saw the protection dissolve. Nia hadn't made it to the main road before the black van intercepted her. There was no conversation, no negotiation, a bag over the head, a needle in the neck. She was gone before the dust settled. Inside the cabin, Minjun's phone vibrated. One message. Attached was a video feed. It showed Nia, bound to a chair in a warehouse, a knife held to the white streak in her hair. The text underneath was simple. Bring us the core, or we finish what you started. I was arrogant. I thought I was the only monster in the forest. I let her go to save her life, and I handed her directly to the butchers. Minjun stood up. The grief vanished. The regret evaporated. In their place, the old cold returned, but this time it wasn't a curse. It was a weapon. He had tried to be human. He had tried to be soft, and it had cost him the only thing that mattered. He grabbed his coat. He didn't check for his gun. He wouldn't need it. He was going to bring them exactly what they asked for. The headquarters of the council was not on a map. It was a fortress of spiritual wards and concrete, designed to repel armies. But it was not designed to repel a force of nature. Minjun did not infiltrate the building. He dismantled it. For 600 years, he had tempered his power, terrified of hurting the fragile world around him. But walking through those doors, he stripped away the humanity he had spent centuries cultivating. He let the Dakibai take the wheel. He moved through the hallways like a glacier, unstoppable and unfeeling. Shadows lashed out from his silhouette, snapping necks and freezing limbs. Security teams fired automatic weapons, but the bullets shattered against the air before they could touch him. He turned the corridor into a morgue of ice sculptures. He wasn't fighting. He was cleaning. He reached the inner sanctum. The temperature in the room plummeted to Arctic levels. There, on a ritual altar carved from obsidian, was Nia. She was conscious, battered, the white streak in her hair glowing faintly in the gloom. Standing behind her was the council leader, an ancient man whose greed had outlived his caution. He held a blade of celestial steel against Nia's jugular. The leader smiled. He knew he couldn't defeat Minjun in combat, but he knew the math of leverage. "The core," the leader demanded, his hand steady. "Give me the source. Give me the eternity, or the girl bleeds out before you can cross the room." It was the impossible choice. The core was not just a battery, it was Minjun's soul. It was the engine that kept him alive, the anchor that kept him immortal. To remove it was suicide. Minjun looked at Nia. Her eyes were wide, pleading with him to stop, shaking her head. She would rather die than watch him destroy himself. But Minjun had already made his decision in the car. He looked at the leader. "Take it," he said. Minjun didn't use a knife. He plunged his own hand into his chest, phasing through the flesh, gripping the source of his existence. With a scream that shook the foundation of the building, he ripped it out. A sphere of blinding, blue-white light pulsed in his hand. The room screamed with energy. It was beautiful. It was pure. It was the concentrated essence of 600 winters. Minjun fell to his knees, his life force severed. He rolled the sphere across the floor toward the leader. The leader dropped the knife. He stepped away from Nia, his eyes filled with the madness of absolute power. He reached down. He grabbed the core with both hands. He expected godhood. He received physics. The council leader had forgotten why Minjun was alone for so long. He had forgotten that the core was absolute zero. Only a sunchild, a being of immense spiritual heat, could be near it. A normal human, even a sorcerer, was just water waiting to freeze. The moment the leader's skin touched the blue light, there was no struggle. There was no scream. He flash froze. In a microsecond, he was turned into a statue of solid ice, his face frozen in a rictus of triumph that would never be realized. The core, unsupported by a compatible host, shattered into dust. The villain was gone, but so was the immortality. Minjun collapsed. Nia ripped free of her bindings. She scrambled across the floor, sliding over the ice, ignoring the cold that lingered in the air. She pulled Minjun into her lap. He was pale. His eyes were dimming. The chest wound where the core had been was not bleeding. It was empty. For the first time in history, the dynamic was completely normalized. He wasn't a god. He wasn't a monster. He was just a dying man. Nia was weeping, her tears falling onto his face. She gripped his hand, preparing for the shock of the cold, preparing for the pain. But there was no pain. She gasped. She pressed her hand to his cheek. She pressed her forehead against his. He wasn't cold. He was warm. The curse was broken. The ice was gone. The room went silent, mirroring the banquet hall where they met. But this time, the silence wasn't born of fear. It was born of grief. Minjun looked up at her, his vision failing. He felt her tears on his skin, hot, wet, real. He smiled, a weak human smile. "So this," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "is what warmth feels like." His eyes closed. His hand went limp in hers. And for a terrible, stretching moment, the only sound in the room was Nia's sobbing. 6 months later, Gangwon Province. The winter here is harsh, but inside the small wooden house, the fireplace is always lit. Minjun sits in an armchair by the window, a blanket draped over his legs. He is thinner now. There are lines around his eyes that weren't there before. When the wind howls outside, he shivers. He catches colds. He bruises. He is wonderfully, painfully human. He is a man who believes he has paid his debt. He believes the ledger is balanced. He sleeps soundly for the first time in 600 years, convinced that the monster is dead and the magic is gone. He is wrong. In the kitchen, out of his line of sight, Nia stands by the counter. She is preparing his evening tea. She moves with a strange, deliberate caution. She is no longer the terrified maid. She is the guardian. The silence in the house is heavy, pregnant with a secret that is slowly eating her alive. She reaches for a glass of water on the counter. The camera lingers on her hand. As her fingers graze the glass, the skin doesn't flush with warmth. For a split second, her fingertips turn a deep, necrotic black. The water inside the glass doesn't ripple. It stops, instantly. Frost patterns spiderweb across the crystal, freezing the liquid solid in the blink of an eye. The glass cracks under the pressure of the expanding ice. Nia pulls her hand back sharply, hiding it in the folds of her sweater. She breathes heavily, staring at the frozen glass, her breath misting in the sudden drop of temperature. Minjun calls out from the other room, asking if everything is all right. Nia clears her throat. She forces a smile that he cannot see. "Everything is fine," she answers. Her voice is steady, but her hands are trembling. Energy is never destroyed. It merely changes form. When Minjun ripped the core from his chest, it didn't shatter into nothingness. It sought the only vessel strong enough to hold it. It sought the Sun Child. When she held him on the floor of the council chamber, she didn't just comfort him. She absorbed him. She took the ice into her veins so he could feel the sun. She looks at her reflection in the darkened window. Her eyes flash, a momentary, terrifying blue. He thinks he gave up everything to save me. He looks at me and sees a survivor. He doesn't know the truth. I took his burden so he could finally sleep. Nia picks up the frozen glass and throws it into the trash, hiding the evidence. She picks up the hot tea, her hands numb to the heat, and walks back into the living room to serve the man she loves. The Docubai isn't dead. She just has a new name. Should she tell him? Part 2 coming soon. The story does not end in silence. It ends with a question that demands an answer. Nia made a choice in that council chamber. She chose to become the vessel of a curse that has destroyed lives for centuries, all to grant Minjun a few decades of mortality. I leave this judgment to you. Did Nia make the right choice by taking the burden upon herself? Or should she have let the magic and Minjun die together? And consider this final equation of pain. Minjun suffered the isolation of ice for 600 years. Nia suffered the terror of loving a monster who could kill her with a touch. In the comments below, tell me, who suffered more in this story? Minjun for his time or Nia for her love? The answer might determine what happens in part 2. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories that will keep you up at night.